to this.
Firstly, when you start with an apology, it's never a good trend to set, but let us apologize at the start for the late start. However, we will begin. I'm inviting those of our panelists who are already here to take these seats to the front. Therefore, I invite the Chairman and CEO of Environmental Solutions Limited, Mrs. Eleanor Jones, Dr. Jenna Blackwood, Landscape Architect, Mr. Michael Williams, Superintendent of Public Gardens, and Miss Dainalyn Swaby, Climate Communications Specialist and Podcaster, if you could come forward. I'll also invite the Honourable Matthew Samuda, Minister, to come to the front as well. Or you can sit. Yeah, you're good. Let's start. Let me make a change. Deputizing for Mr. Michael Williams is Mr. LeSean Reeves, and LeSean is seated next to Dainalyn. I'll now invite us to stand for the national anthem. be seated. And we'll now invite Mr. Derek Simon, Commercial Services Manager at NPF, for prayer. And as Mr. Simon comes forward, Mrs. Jones has made an excellent point. It's a little disconcerting for the panelists and the minister to sit away from the audience, especially as presentations are being made. So, Senator, if you will join the panelists at the front row to my left. Thank you very much, Sir Simon.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like us to pray together. Our God and Heavenly Father, as we are gathered here this afternoon, Lord, we sense the great significance of a forum such as this and how you have blessed it. Amidst the drought, in some areas we received 8 or 10 hours of rain yesterday. How fitting. And we pray, Lord, that you, just as you sent the rain on the land, you will send the rain of your kingship to our hearts. Heavenly Father, we scarcely believe that today will be a day of discussing the legitimacy of green spaces. Rather, we want to champion the cause for a lot more of them. We thank you that this forum is entitled a public forum, and our prized stakeholder is the public of Jamaica. And we have come today, Lord, to lay down our stewardship over many years. By no means for accolades, but to open up ourselves and what we have done to your scrutiny. And Lord, for your assessment and the assessment of those you have sent today. May we learn from the criticisms that we will receive, and so that we can do better. We are mindful, Lord, of the reality of climate change. Help us, Lord. Give us wisdom with resilience and how to prepare better and better. We are mindful of our 2030 vision for Jamaica. But we, Lord, want to be visionaries way beyond 2030. We want to shape plans for you as we are stewards of this environment, to have even a greater vision for our aquifers, even a greater vision for our carbon footprints, even a greater vision just for how we treat the environment, our waste management, and all of those things that will cause us to earn a better environment for 2030 and beyond. And we think of our children yet unborn, and we really purposely want to leave a better inheritance for them. Lord, we ask that you will take the impulses of our heart and the intellect of our minds and our wills to stand up and to fight and to proclaim that we want a better environment. We want more spaces like this for health reasons, for research reasons, and for maintaining our critical biodiversity. So, Lord, we thank you for the panelists, and all who have come, journeyed far and wide. May they be inspired, and that great resolutions might emanate in our hearts out of today. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you, Mr. Simon. If we were, among other things, to have achieved a prayer for better environmental stewardship, an official prayer for that, I think we can draw from the prayer that was just proffered. My name is Raymond Price. I'll be your moderator this morning, this afternoon, and the job falls to me to do the welcome, the official welcome and the opening remarks. So on behalf of the Nature Preservation Foundation, it is my honor to welcome the Honourable Matthew Samuda, Senator and Minister with Responsibility for Environment and Climate Change. With us today is the Chairman of the National Preservation Foundation, Mr. Alfred Thomas. We have our panelists, Mrs. Eleanor Jones, Dr. Jenna Blackwood, Mr. LeSean Reeves, Ms. Dainalyn Swaby, and other officials representing the National Preservation Foundation. And most importantly, you who are here with us in person and those who would be monitoring and sharing in today's activity via the live stream. By way of brief opening remarks, all available data and indicators suggest that by 2030, more than 70% of Jamaicans will reside in urban areas. This also speaks to the fact that more rural areas will have become urbanized with the expansion of residential and commercial development in areas previously reserved for agriculture. As so-called city living expands, there will be growing demands for energy solutions and greater use made on our forested or agricultural areas for roads and related infrastructure. These population pressures, in association with the significant issues that come with climate change, start to raise concerns not only for our biological systems and the broader natural environment, but for the conditions that will impact on our quality of life. We can anticipate continued degradation of our natural systems, additional changes in land use, loss of function of green or forested spaces, and even competing uses for large land parcels typically used for specialized purposes. In the Kingston area, these would include Jamaica House, King's House, and Up Park Camp, which are among the largest parcels of lands that have retained their boundaries well over 70 years. We cannot but be concerned about how the contingent changes will impact our quality of life. These impacts could include rerouting of roadways, relocation of critical public facilities, changes in the remaining natural ecosystems, and ultimately losses in biodiversity, if not even extinction of plant and animal species, some regrettably not yet discovered or described. These contingent changes can also have negative effects on the human population, society on a whole, and on individual bases. These could include reduced access to open spaces, spatial fatigue, decline in general well-being, reduced physical activity, and a host of opportunistic diseases or worsening of existing morbidities. In such a scenario, mental illness is also anticipated to become more expressed within urban populations. Many theorists, as well as accepted research, now show the psychological, physiological, environmental, social, and health benefits for humans in close and regular contact with natural environments. For many people, especially in an increasingly urbanized Jamaica, parks, botanical gardens, and similar green spaces are often the only possible sources for families and individuals to maintain contact with the natural world. For 1.5 centuries, 150 years, the Hope Botanical Gardens, now named the Hope Royal Botanical Gardens, have provided those services and opportunities to the Jamaican society. For botanical gardens to be sustainable and to optimize the benefits they provide to society, managers must understand that their role is to ensure the viability with respect to the social, environmental, and financial services provided to the wider marketplace. The objective of today's public forum, therefore, among other things, is to bring leaders of policy, subject matter experts, youth influencers, civil society, and media into a common place and under a common theme to ensure that these gardens are able to complete a second century and grow sustainably well beyond 2073 to continue to provide their celebrated agency to the Jamaican population well into the future. With that, I invite the chairman of the National Preservation Foundation for the Hope Royal Botanical Gardens 150th anniversary commemoration, Mr. Alfred Thomas, to bring his opening presentations.
Mr. Price, good afternoon. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Minister Samuda, nice to see you here, sir. Very cool, lovely afternoon that invites the environment to be positive. Panelists, we look forward to your presentations and for us to be able to ask you questions. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, we are very happy that you're here. For those of you who are listening out there, we hope that you'll also post in some questions so that the panelists will be able to answer and to stimulate your minds. Ladies and gentlemen, we are very happy you're here. 150 years of existence is a lot of number of years. There are only few companies in Jamaica which fall under the category of over 150 years. We here at NPF, at Hope Gardens, are making every effort to preserve this piece of green space, which is over 200 acres. We have had challenges. We have had requests to build houses, to do this and to do that. So we are some gatekeepers. The board of NPF consists of 17 members, and all of these members do volunteer work. And we must applaud the directors and the members of the board who give their time and, in many cases, resources to assist this very lovely place. We have started somewhat re-engineering of the garden. You might have seen the entrance, and there are other things that we have established whereby we want to see this place change and preserved. So we're moving for change and we are moving for preservation. Preservation meaning some of the green spaces that are here are needed for the people and the children of Jamaica, and also for the visitors. We are engaging the diaspora to see how we can get additional resources to help. So we want to thank all the persons who have been contributing, who have been supporting, and we can only say to all the persons who listen, who participate this afternoon, for you to continue to support. Minister, we thank you for your presence here, and we hope that we will continue to be partners so that you can help us to continue to change Hope Gardens to the place we want it to be and to be maintained. We want to thank you all for coming, and we look forward to the discussion from the panelists. And we hope that at the end of today, we'll be better prepared to continue to preserve our environment and to preserve this land space for the people and the children of Jamaica. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas, the chairman of the Nature Preservation Foundation. The keynote speaker this evening, as you know, is the Honourable Matthew Samuda. Senator the Honourable Matthew Samuda currently serves as Minister without Portfolio in the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation, where he is assigned portfolio responsibilities for water, environment, climate change, and the blue and green economies. Minister Samuda's experience began as president of the Student Council at Campion College. He served the National Student Council Interim Management Committee. He's been a vice president of Generation 2000 and has served on the board as a member of the board of directors for the Agricultural Investment Corporation, as well as many other boards and committees. Minister Samuda's credential to be the custodian of the portfolios that he leads began, or is probably most symbolized, by his tabling of a private member's motion in 2016 for the ban on single-use plastics and styrofoam, which became law in 2019. With that applause and hopefully a separate round, we invite Minister Matthew Samuda to deliver the keynote address.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Allow me to acknowledge Mr. Raymond Price, moderator, politician, and environmental specialist. Haven't seen Her Excellency, but will acknowledge her in her absence, Most Honourable Lady Allen, Minister Green and Witter, who I know are trying to be here, Her Excellency Marianne Van Steen, and Mr. Alfred Thomas, Chairman of the National Preservation Foundation, Mrs. Carla Myrie, Executive Director of the NPF, fellow panelists, media representatives, neighbors, friends of Hope Gardens, interested parties all. It's my pleasure to join you for the 150th anniversary celebration of the Hope Royal Botanic Gardens, which is being celebrated under the theme, I understand, 150 years of hope, a celebration of the flora, fauna, and people. The rich history of this garden's existence dates to 1655, when the earliest users were reportedly the Tainos and later the Spaniards. Previously named the Hope Gardens after Major Richard Hope, one of the early English settlers who helped to capture Jamaica from the Spanish, it was used as an experimental and teaching station and later expanded to become a public park intended for use by all in 1873. Then under the ownership of the government of Jamaica. In 1953, on the visit of the late Queen Elizabeth II to Jamaica, Her Majesty bestowed the coveted royal designation upon the gardens, resulting in the property being renamed the Royal Botanic Gardens of Hope, the first of any public garden or park in the Caribbean region. The last time I was here in my official capacity, it was indeed upon the occasion of the visit of the Indian president. So it brings me great pleasure to return to these grounds on another celebratory occasion. Last year, the Indian president, Sri Ramnath Kovind, visited the Hope Botanical Gardens, where he inaugurated the India-Jamaica Friendship Garden and participated in the planting of a sapling of sandalwood. I'm happy to report that it is still alive and thriving, having checked on it several times with my son. Yes. The Indian diaspora is a living bridge indeed between our countries, and it is a matter of pride for us that members of the Indian diaspora are recognized at the highest levels for their contribution to Jamaica. We are very proud of their achievements of the Indian community and proud of their support of Hope Gardens. Now, a Royal Botanical Garden, or Botanical Garden rather. What does that mean to us? What does it mean in its 150th year? Hopefully the discussion this afternoon will articulate a vision for what it can mean and what it should mean and what we need to do, both within the garden as well as in supporting the microclimate around it. As mentioned by colleague Minister and MP for St. Andrew Eastern, Honourable Favour Williams, the green space represents an oasis but also allows for information gathering on a variety of botanical collections. With the recently designed eastern entrance of the Hope Botanical Gardens, we are well on our way to being on par with visitor attractions overseas and certainly creating the sort of welcoming environment for our local guests. She was pleased when she spoke here last that the requisite environmentally friendly solutions of solar energy and rainwater harvesting were being implemented. But the part that I found most interesting from her speech was when she referred to Hope Gardens as one of the 8 wonders of Eastern St. Andrew. Eastern St. Andrew was both the University of the West Indies, University of Technology, the Mona Reservoir, and indeed Hope Gardens. I can't recall the other 4, but we'll stick with that for now. I commend the Nature Preservation Foundation for its continued preservation of the Hope Royal Botanic Gardens for the enjoyment of future generations and for using this forum to engage and sensitize a wide cross-section of the Jamaican public on the important role of the gardens. I wish to state categorically that in looking at the boundaries, they will have the support of the Jamaican government to ensure it is not left to 17 gatekeepers, but rather that we entrench in law the protection of this space for generations to come. The climate crisis is not a far-off concept. It is something that we are experiencing right now. In the 6 months leading up to the end of March, Jamaica recorded its driest period ever. The least amount of rainfall recorded in Jamaica since we've been recording rainfall was a 6-month period ending in March 2023. The climate crisis is evident. It is the reality of our time, and the challenges will no doubt reflect in our present challenges and indeed in our near future. That makes the benefit of green spaces all the more important. Now, green spaces, as we know, can't always be left to gatekeepers or to the whims and fancies of others. Oftentimes, there has to be legal protection and there has to be appropriate investment. The need and the support that it provides for human health, for mental health, for environmental health, and is obviously well known. The government recognizes this and is taking necessary steps to preserve the importance of green spaces, and I will go through a few of those measures that you're aware of and some that are to come. Jamaica has to analyze its green space and its forestry cover scientifically. There are a lot of times that we all feel emotional about the approach that is taken to development, and some of these emotions are indeed represented in my own feelings on some of the decisions that we've made over the 50 years, or 60 years rather. Jamaica is a participant in the RED Plus program. It forms the basis of Jamaica's analysis of its land use and its forest cover. The project is being done in the collaboration with the Forestry Department at the cost of approximately US $613,000. It aims to assist Jamaica with the capacity building and putting in place a mechanism to guide the country in becoming RED Plus ready, including the development of a RED Plus strategy. The project, the first phase rather, was completed in August, and phase 2 of the project has indeed commenced. Phase 1 would have identified that despite much perception, Jamaica's forestry cover is actually in incline as opposed to decline. Now, how that is made up and where we've had gains is actually in secondary forest cover, primarily as some forests have reclaimed old agricultural lands which are not in use. Our areas of decline and where concerned citizens should put focus have been primarily in our dry harbor forests and in our mangrove cover. Those are the areas that we have not performed well as a state. We've had very marginal reduction in our primary forest cover, but the expectation is that with the rate of secondary forest growth and the calculation that was done, within the next 8 years, you should actually have increases in your primary forest cover. So we are seeing gains in terms of total forest cover. Now, that doesn't mean that we should have carte blanche access to do what you want to do in areas that don't have forest cover. And that's not at all what I mean. But I think it's important as we get into the discussions in terms of how we build our green spaces, that we actually acknowledge just how much of Jamaica is indeed green space and how we will continue to use it. It's well known that Jamaica has approximately 40% forest cover. Now, it is also well known that within that forest cover, much of the forest has indeed been impacted. It is why we have been moving rapidly to increase our levels of protection. Jamaica, I believe, would have joined the High Ambition Coalition sometime in the last 10 years. The High Ambition Coalition called for 30% protection of landmass, 30% protection of your EEZ by 2030. That would have been the call that became the basis of the Global Biodiversity Framework, which would have been signed in Montreal on the Kunming holding of COP15 last year. Jamaica has supported this call for a long time. It's why I'm happy to report that as of today, Jamaica has protected 25% of its landmass and will complete protection of 30% of its landmass by 2025, a full 5 years ahead of the international targets and agreed in the Global Biodiversity Framework. This would have come from the recent protections of over 79,000 hectares of the cockpit country, and indeed the Black River protection orders, which would have been issued last year. These are things that we're particularly proud of. We also would have completed the protection framework for 15 ecologically sensitive areas, which were deemed to be particularly sensitive areas that should be managed in a very cohesive way. It's no secret and impatient of debate that government hasn't always worked in a cohesive manner to implement and to monitor the land use declarations that it makes. These areas have been identified as areas that must have a management committee that constantly monitors activities in and around these areas to ensure that they're indeed protected. Those are your big targets. But acknowledging that we haven't always made the right decisions, and I think no one would question that. In 2019, the Prime Minister, in acknowledging that we haven't always made the right decisions, said we needed to do significant replanting in the areas where there was degradation. It's why we would have launched a national tree planting initiative targeting 3 million trees, in essence, 1 tree per Jamaican in 2019. As of today, we have surpassed 2.5 million trees. Our estimation is that more than 90% of those have survived the planting period and have actually caught. And we track it regularly, certainly within the government lands and within our partners who have helped us to replant significant farmlands, and indeed with other private owners of land who would have asked us for assistance in replanting. So that is progressing pretty well. There is significant work and a national plan and strategy being implemented in terms of mangrove restoration. That is not progressing at the pace that we would want, and there will have to be significant work in this regard. Tomorrow I will be actually spending the day with Professor Forrester and his team from USODECO, who are looking at the restoration of some 3,800 acres of mangrove forest in Clarendon. But thinking of green spaces, thinking of what Hope Gardens represents to most Jamaicans, it is that green oasis, as Minister Williams would have called it, in the center of a relatively developed area of our country. So how have we developed, and how will we ensure that tree cover is not just maintained but increased, considering what we've done over the last 60 years in Kingston and St. Andrew? One of the ways that we will do so is in looking at the areas where there has been significant development. We have embarked on a significant urban forestry initiative. This initiative, and to get granular and parochial, will include areas where there have been significant development in recent years. Two corridors that should come to mind would be off of the East Kings House Road corridor and indeed the Lady Musgrave corridor and as well Arthur Wint. There have been significant developments in that area and no doubt significant development to come, including roadwork. In analyzing the area with the NWA and indeed the Forestry Department, when we did the census, or the scan rather, of trees in that area, we found that there were 208 trees along the corridor. Now, 208 trees will not be affected, but we did the math and said, well, analysis needed to be done to see which ones, based on their root structure, could be replanted elsewhere, could be removed safely. The government has started the procurement process and will not start the work until this equipment is in Jamaica for the equipment that would be able to move trees with particular root structures. So for all highway development and other development going forward being done by the Jamaican government, once trees can be relocated safely, we will do so. Where it is not appropriate to do so, you won't be able to. The analysis was done, and even in looking at the designs, there were slight adjustments to design to protect as many of the trees along the corridor as possible. But even then, understanding the risks, we didn't stop there. In, I think it was February of this year, we reached out to citizens in and around that corridor, and we distributed some 3,000 seedlings to them for planting. And it was a great afternoon for me as we distributed that, because Jamaicans are never happy with a line. And it was interesting for me to see, as we'd set up at the Barbican Beach, hundreds of citizens coming and waiting in a little, I mean, we hadn't planned it properly, admittedly. Hundreds of citizens waiting in line to collect trees. We had a similar experience when we used Barbican Square to do it. We had similar experience when we went down to the parking lot in front of Bustamante Children's Hospital. So it showed great interest in greening of the community. We know there's been significant housing which has displaced trees in the space, and we know that roadwork will no doubt do the same. So we said, well, 200 are at risk. We've done what we can to save as many of those as is possible. We've also made the investment to ensure we're able to relocate those that can be safely done, and we have insisted that even the trees that come down, those limbs, those trees are preserved in a particular way that allows for artistic use, certainly within even your bus stops, etc., in an interesting manner. So we'll speak more to that. But the government also said, well, we won't leave it up to citizens. We commenced the process and we've put in the irrigation infrastructure using grey water, so certainly not using potable water that would be able to there, that will allow us to plant some 3,000 trees between King's House, Jamaica House, Ranny Williams and the Police Officers Club, along with the NIF piece of land at the corner of Hope Field and Lady Musgrave. So that will significantly green the area that would have been affected significantly by development in the area. But this focus on planting in urban spaces should mean that we protect what we have. We shouldn't degrade and then try to restore. And I think that at the core is why Hope Gardens is absolutely so critical to Kingston and St. Andrew. It's why our doctrine for development must change as a nation. It's why we have to look at these sorts of assets and invest in them accordingly. I think the next phase and the next 150 years of the Hope Botanical Garden will depend on a very important discussion, and that discussion will be the appropriate financing mechanism. The staff don't work for free, as committed as they are. The light bill for now won't be free. The costs of fertilizer and other items won't be for free. I recall when I was doing some work in 2009 with Clara, for those of you who remember that phone network, we looked at a significant donation into the sustainability of Hope Gardens. And at that time, when we looked at the numbers, I recall the gap being somewhere in the region of $100 million in 2009. a little afraid to ask, especially where in the government had what the gap is now. But ladies and gentlemen, that is going to trigger the next 150 years. That is going to ensure that the Hope Gardens we want today looks, feels, and accommodates people in the way that we want to. That is going to remove all asinine discussion of land use other than as a garden from the equation, and I think that is absolutely important. Now, there are a number of blended finance options that we'll have to explore. And what I commit to the Preservation Foundation is that I'll make myself and my office available to you to design the appropriate mechanisms that allow us to raise international funds, to get the appropriate government allocations, and indeed to engage the private sector. Jamaica is not a rich country. It'll take a number of sources to ensure that this is indeed protected, but you will have the support of my office as we design the appropriate mechanisms. This should be an example for every parish. We have a lot of work to do. Certainly in the soon-to-be parish of Portmore, Mr. Price, we will be later this year breaking ground for the development of the Portmore Resilience Park. We've settled on the grey water requirement for the irrigation of that space. We've already done the soil studies, and we will no doubt lean on the expertise and passion of all of those who would have worked to keep Hope Gardens this green oasis that it is. Ultimately, all of us will need it. It is why the government will continue to invest in the Kingston Harbour Park, or rather in the development of the Kingston Harbour Park, which will break ground along the waterfront later this year. It is why in the Montego Bay, the Morant Bay rather, urban centre, significant space has been reserved for green space. It is why in the Boundbrook urban centre, more than half of the space that is to be used and developed is indeed reserved for green space. It is why within even the space that is designed, or rather designated for the new Parliament building, will be surrounded by 310 trees which are not in that space. Now, congratulations have already been extended to the Nature Preservation Foundation, but I'm sure for those who are here, you'd like a little more than congratulations. I had a meeting with newly returned Minister of Agriculture, Floyd Green, in relation to allocation of resources for Hope Gardens. There are some things within the capacity of the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation by way of roadways, drainage, and some supporting infrastructure that will make things easier. We'll be looking at those through the supplementary estimates later in this year. And myself and Floyd Green have agreed to forming a joint intergovernment committee with yourselves to develop that financing model, as well as to ensure that there is a long-term plan for the preservation and restoration of areas that may be of concern to you for Hope Gardens. And I congratulate you on the work that you've done and look forward to working with you in the future.
Thank you very much, Minister Samuda. Ladies and gentlemen, we are now going to get into the second phase of our activities this afternoon. I've been advised that Minister may leave prior to the completion of the panel discussion, but I am sure you will join me in expressing gratitude for the openings and entry points he provided in his own presentation, especially at the very last with respect to the design of a sustainability model that provides the requisite financing to maintain this current perimeter in either its current state or over time an improved state. So once again, thank you, Minister Samuda. Prior to the panel discussion, we will have a video, which is a presentation entitled A Marriage of History and Beauty. In another space, I would have thought that's an older man getting married to a younger woman. But here it is. It's about the history and beauty of the Royal Botanical Gardens here at Hope.
is the past, in a graveyard of neglect and ignorance. But what if our heroic collective courage could exhume the whole wondrous dynasty of this garden of hope? How delicately and how responsibly would we bequeath this birthright legacy to our children's children? How would we right the wronged, intravenously fed to our blindfolded hearts for over 500 years? Is more than an endearing Jamaican folktale. It is the complicated history of Western empires and their tumultuous conquest of the New World. It was a time of untarnished craves before the first Europeans visited our region. This land of wood and water was the homeland of an innocence that is now extinct. The 14th century, the Caribbean region, a picturesque, sublime paradise that was and had been inhabited by the Tahinos for over thousands of years. Long before Christopher Columbus was even born. Columbus lands on the northern shores of Jamaica in a region known today as Discovery Bay. He is peacefully greeted by the resident natives, the Tahinos. However, the peace does not last, as Columbus soon after claims the Taínos' homeland as property of the Queen of Spain. This outrageous claim was the beginning of various challenges and disagreements which resulted in the violent extinction of the native Taínos. 1509, the Spaniards established Sevilla la Nueva, known today as New Seville, as the first European settlement and first capital of Jamaica. In 1513, having almost decimated the entire Taínos population, the Spaniards began to transport captive Africans for forced labor to Jamaica. 1534, the Spaniards built their new island capital, Villa de la Vega, city on the plains, in what is known today as Spanish Town. 1655, members of the British Army, under the leadership of Admiral Sir William Penn and General Robert Venables, captured the sparsely guarded Jamaica from its Spanish conquistadors. 1655, after the successful British conquest of Jamaica from the Spanish, Major Richard Hope, one of the military leaders in the conquering British Army, was given a 2,000 acres estate that extended from the hills of Newcastle across the hills of St. Mary, stretched all the way to Ocherius and back to downtown Kingston. This generosity, in appreciation for his contribution in gaining control of Jamaica, Major Hope, newly gifted estate, was subsequently developed as a sugar plantation. 1873, 150 years ago, and a few years after Paul Bogle and George William Gordon led a major uprising against the plantocracy's ill-fated governance of Jamaica. The then recently installed British Governor of Jamaica, Sir John Peter Grant, designates a select portion of Major Richard Hope's bestowed estate and christens it Hope Royal Botanical Gardens. Today, in 2023, a 150 years since its name christening of the property in the name of Major Richard Hope, the Hope Royal Botanical Gardens is ironically a symbolic sanctuary of humanity's hope. Its beneficiaries, largely unaware that the signature spiritual and psychological hope that embodies these gardens was also the previous landholder's name. These enchanted gardens continue its centuries-long legacy of history and beauty through the joint maternal-like love and nourishing of its extended family of surrogate caretakers.
All in all, my period at Hope Gardens, 1962 until 1965, I was extremely happy.
And we can have this presentation instead of being in the cane piece. There is hope.
Hope Gardens, 150th anniversary. Come, celebrate it.
Hope Gardens, 150th. Come celebrate with us.
Hope Gardens 150. Come celebrate with us.
Come join in the celebration of Hope Gardens 150th.
Hope Gardens 150. Come celebrate with us.
just to say, ladies and gentlemen, that commemorative film is a work in progress, and for it to be completed requires some of the innovative funding solutions that hopefully will come up, if not be settled in the public forum, the panel discussion which now commences. And for that, let me again invite Dr. Jenna Blackwood, a practicing landscape architect and environmental consultant with approximately 30 years of experience in both industries. She has worked in the public and private sectors on a range of projects such as hotels, residential and commercial developments, tourism attractions, and across the region in various capacities with respect to development plans. Her PhD research focused on household stormwater management and the structure of stormwater governance in Barbados, Jamaica, and St. Lucia. Presently, she is an adjunct lecturer at the Caribbean School of Architecture, where she teaches introductory courses in landscape architecture and environmental management. She's a member of a number of professional organizations and currently is a president of the Central American and Caribbean Association of Landscape Architects. Please welcome Dr. Jenna Blackwood. Also joining Jenna is Eleanor Jones, OD. Eleanor is an international environmental planning, sustainable development, and disaster risk management strategist. She has served as a change agent throughout the territories of CARIFORUM, the non-independent states of the Caribbean, the Maldives in South Asia, Switzerland, Canada, the US, and West Africa. In building environmental sustainability, natural hazard vulnerability reduction, comprehensive disaster risk management, and climate change mitigation and adaptation policies, strategies, and plans. Mrs. Jones has provided consultancies to bilateral and multilateral, regional and international organizations for effecting institutional and operational capacity building and change, and with regional governments, private enterprise, and civil society to implement social, economic, and environmental programs for sustainability. She has worked for more than 30 years in academia, applied research, results-based management processes, and civil society activities. Mrs. Jones was integrally involved in the development of the first 2 iterations of the Caribbean Comprehensive Disaster Management Strategy developed by CDMA, and has held extensive consultations in both the public and private sectors, as well as across civil society throughout CDMA participating states on several aspects of comprehensive disaster risk management and climate resilience building. She didn't include this in her bio, but my foray into environmental sciences was based on my first interaction with her at a presentation she did at a career expo while I was a high school student, and subsequently one of my lecturers in the program at UTech for sustainable energy and climate change. So I'm very pleased. Well, a disclaimer, any problems you may have with anything I do across society are not to be linked to Mrs. Jones's record. I'm very honored to introduce Eleanor Jones to the panel. Also joining Jenna and Eleanor is Dainalyn Swaby. Dainalyn is a development communication specialist operating at the nexus between climate change and culture. In her professional and volunteer roles, she has developed and supported several youth-led and climate-related engagement campaigns, research and outreach projects on a local and international level. These include co-development of global youth engagement plans through the NDC Partnership Youth Task Force and coordination of a climate change position paper as a 2021 Global Youth Climate Network Ambassador through the World Bank's Youth to Youth initiative. She's a 2019 Chevening Scholar and holds a Master's of Arts in Global Communication and Development from Loughborough University, London. Her dissertation, an investigation of the lived experiences of youth in Jamaica and their response to climate change engagement, has been published by the institution. Dainalyn is now a podcaster and creative writer and content developer, and has produced several podcast series such as Global Yardie and dialect pieces exclusively focused on climate change, culture, and sustainable development. She's a Rotaractor. Some people find that a very important qualification. And her club is to be credited with the Peace, her parent club is to be credited with the Peace Garden, which is just to our east. And some of us would have passed it upon our entry. Dainalyn, please join your fellow panelists. And we're saving the best for last, because LeSean is a today addition to the panel, and unfortunately I did not get a copy of his bio, so I will depend on Mr. Reeves that when he first speaks as a panelist, that you will give some insight into who you are and your representation, I'm sure, of Mr. Michael Williams, the Superintendent of Public Gardens, for whom you're deputizing. I'm sure that he and the rest of us will be pleased with your participation. Please come forward, LeSean. And I see that Jenna has the microphone. Oh, you all each have a microphone. Okay, great. Yes, but we'll still start with you. That was the greater point I was getting to. The theme for today, as you are aware, one second, let me get to the theme. 150 years of hope, a celebration of flora, fauna, and people. With that, we will now hear directly from our panelists. There will be opportunities, I believe, for questions and answers. The more, what I have discovered at events like these is that the more we make the questions succinct and to the point, is the more value we get from our esteemed panelists in terms of their responses. So please, when that time comes, be as succinct and as precise as possible. Jenna, over to you.
Hello, are you hearing me? Okay, good afternoon, everybody. I'm so honored to be here this afternoon to share a little bit on my profession and on our approach to landscape architecture and the creation of green spaces. One of the things that Mrs. Jones said, I was remiss from not mentioning that I was involved in the Emancipation Park project. So I was the landscape architect on that project, which celebrated 20 years last year. That has been a significant, made a significant change to our urban landscape. And as such, we're hoping for many more like that. One of the first things that I think I would want to mention is I'm here in the capacity of a landscape architect. And I think many people are not aware of what a landscape architect is or does. We are that profession, so we're not an architect. We're not a building architect. We're not a horticulturist. We're not a botanist. We're not landscape contractors. We're not the people that you show a leaf to and say this insect is on it. We are design professionals who help to guide the creation, the planning of green spaces, external environment, essentially. That's what we specialize in. Our history is very long. People have been changing their surroundings since caveman days, and we developed out of, I guess, the gentry. But one of the things that I wanted to mention is in our long history, the term or the title landscape architect really became popular when Central Park in New York was developed. And Central Park, interestingly, was developed around the same time as Hope Gardens. And so we share that history of the time when this name first came about. And it was because when Central Park was developed, it was similar to Hope Gardens in the sense that At the time, there were certain things that were considered to be necessary for a public space. They spoke of a bandstand, they spoke of strolling pathways, they spoke of a lake, they spoke of a maze. And all of those things you will see here at Hope Gardens. So those things are also there at Central Park. But one of the things that makes it different and why this term came about was because it was a very complex project. And when you see the lakes that they have, the mountains that they've created, and the forests that are there in the center of that city, you will see that it took more than the ordinary gardener who was doing gardening around the home to develop something like that. And from there on, they developed courses and the title, and so landscape architects became known as the profession that, at least in the United States, is known for developing urban spaces. Another thing that I wanted to mention was in Jamaica. So we have another long history of landscape architecture in Jamaica, and I think people might not be aware of that as well. In the 1970s, we did have a landscape architect at the UDC. They did have, and Mr. Saniga is here, and he does know that there was a landscape department run by a landscape architect with sometimes more than one landscape architect there. And at the time, that landscape architect was responsible for, in the UDC or in the government system, they would have done planning and planting and designs for the rest of the government entities. So they did hospitals, they did schools, they did craft markets, they did hotels and condominiums, and they did streetscapes. And there were some very successful projects that they did. If you remember, along Mandela Highway, people used to take photos along that highway when it was developed. Tom Redcombe, I know Minister today mentioned Arthur Wint Drive, but they did a very successful project along Tom Redcombe Avenue until it was widened and that roadway was destroyed and that was not replanted. After that, we have had other landscape architects who are here and who have been involved in a number of developments and green spaces around the city. So just to let you know that that profession does exist and is here. And we do have, at the university, there is a module where they do teach, it's an elective, but they do teach an introductory course in landscape architecture. So just saying that there is that avenue here. And then I want to just also touch on now, so we've looked at a little bit at the history, but let's look at the future. So the profession of landscape architecture, and I'm focusing on landscape architecture really as the profession because, we look at planners and architects and other professions, but in the 21st century, as we now become more aware of climate change and the things that Minister spoke about, the droughts, excess rainfall, temperatures, rising temperatures, we now see that some of the things that landscape architects were doing all this time are now things that we are now becoming more mainstream. A lot of our planting efforts, using more natural systems, because the whole thing now is to use natural systems to counter some of the effects, the harmful effects of the developments that we've been doing over time. Just another point on, we're talking today about Vision 2030, and one of the things is to remember Vision 2030 is our dream, it is our goal, it is our utopia. And to get there, there are systems that we need to put in place, plans that we need to put in place to get there. Minister mentioned a lot of things this morning, where they have planting initiatives, etc. But I think as a planner and a designer, I look at how do we do this in a more coordinated approach, in a more coordinated manner. And I would like to leave with you what I found and what I could call the 7 C's of urban design, okay? Some of the things that we should consider as we are trying to develop more spaces like Hope Gardens, and to tie to Hope Gardens and to use Hope Gardens as an example and as a catalyst. We can think of context and character. We look at our history and our culture, and how do we build on that as we're designing for the future. So we need to establish those policies that will allow us to protect these areas that we have. Choice, and this is one thing that's very important, choice. The idea of having green spaces, I know many people think that every green space is the same, and that's not so. Green spaces are developed, you offer a variety of spaces for a variety of people, for a choice. When you develop a sports field, the grandmother doesn't necessarily go to the sports field. She will go if her grandchild or someone is there. But you develop different types of spaces for the needs of different people. And that is why we look at coordinating and creating a number of spaces. Another thing about choice is size matters. So we have a beautiful space like Hope Gardens. And when we develop, it means that we can have a variety, a number of activities that takes place here, which will attract a number of different users. We have an Emancipation Park, but that is a limited space, will attract a certain type of person and has certain number of users. So the idea of, as cities become more and more dense, as we develop, we need those spaces to counter some of the hard developments, okay? Connections, connectivity. We have, Minister mentioned, Hope Gardens and Devon House, and we have King's House, and he mentioned along Kingston waterfront, there are plans to put developments and parks all along the waterfront. So if you look at a map, if you look at a plan, you will see that to the north of our city, we have large green areas, and then we will create this one on the south, this linear park that's going to be along our waterfront. And then what happens in the middle? We have little dots of different things that happen in the middle. So when I speak of connections, how do we tie these things together? Yes, Minister mentioned that we're going to have tree planting along certain greenways, certain streets, but are these planned? How do we create the connectivity? In ecology, you talk about flows. So you talk about water flows, biodiversity flows, energy flows, okay? And you need to tie the areas together so that you can have the connectivity and the flows moving through the whole city. Or else what you get are small dots of green spaces which are hard to maintain on their own and which are under threat. So you need to, you try to create larger spaces and you try to connect the spaces as much as possible. Creativity, and this is one of the things that I think Minister also touched on when he spoke of how are we going to finance these spaces. So there's creativity in that when I mention a diversity of spaces, you can have creativity in the types of spaces that you create. So I want to give some examples. In New York, they've turned an overhead train line into a linear park. That's the High Line for people who have been there. They've got, in Seattle, they have what they call Gasworks Park. That was an old factory that has been repurposed now into a park. We have here our railway stations and our railway lines. Those are spaces, those are places that could become linear public parks because they sit idle at the moment. We have other, we've got gully banks in Colombia. They've widened some of their roadways. You've got a wide median in the middle of the street, And those become linear parks where people can bike and you've got seats, and trees along the roadway. So it is a matter of creativity in trying to create these spaces that we're talking about. We don't always have to rely on government to do that. There are other ways. In New York, they have what they call privately owned public space, where developers are encouraged to create a green area or a public area, and they get an incentive or a benefit on their property, whether it is a tax break, whether it is extra floor area, whatever it is. And then those developers then are the ones who develop and maintain that space, but it becomes accessible to the public. Okay, I'm just saying there's so many ways. So it is up for us to be creative in how we develop these areas. And it also is the creativity, because I know, again, we mentioned about to keep a place like this going. How is it going to be viable? We have got to come up with other ideas of making, of paying the salaries and for the upkeep. So it is about creativity. Custodianship, the policies that we develop. Other areas, other places have tree preservation policies. They say if you chop one tree, you can't take out a tree that's more than a certain diameter. And if you do, you pay a fine, or you've got to replant 3 or 5 or however many you've got to replant. So there are policies that we can put in place to help to protect what we do have, and not always just have to be adding. And one of the things I have so many things, but I'm going to cut it short, but social justice. As a landscape architect, when we talk about diversity and we talk about what I was talking about, it's a matter of social justice. When you look at the map again that I mentioned, everything is in the north. You've got a lot of opportunities, a lot of places in the north. And what happens in the south? Persons who live in the denser areas do not have the access that persons who live in the higher, and you might say in some, more affluent places have. So how do we make it more equitable for everybody, okay? And I think that's one of the things that through collaboration, ensuring that when we are developing our plans, and I know I've said it before, where we should be developing a green plan. I wanted to see a plan and to show how these are all, how the areas are mapped out, but we need to invite everybody to the table so that, and I'm talking about the government and the private sector and the community. And I mean true participation, not where we have already decided on a plan and we're going to show you what we have done, but to actually get the input of people in what they need and how they can also help to get it done. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Blackwood. And Eleanor, over to you.
Thank you very much. I'm mic'd. I assume I'm being projected, right? All right, thank you. This has been between what the minister had to say and listening to Jenna. Again, you get educated each time we speak. I liked what the minister had to say in terms of the phrase, the doctrine for development must change. And I say that because we use the term development synonymously with buildings and with structures, and that's not really development in my opinion. We speak about sustainable development now, where we're looking at growth, we're looking at how we deal with our people, how we deal with the economics, and how we deal with environment, and now we're talking people, planet, prosperity. So if we really are talking about development, we have to look at sustainable development. And so that doctrine has to change, but how do we get change? There are so many pieces that I can pick up on, but I wanted to start, since we're here at Hope Gardens, There are some young people, there are some not so young people. I wonder how many people remember this extract from this poem. A thing of beauty is a joy forever. Its loveliness increases. It will never pass into nothingness, but still will keep a bower quiet for us and a sleep full of sweet dreams and health and quiet breathing. Anyone knows that? John Keats is the poet. Some of us learned it in school. I see my friends shaking heads. We can tell our age group. But that's what I see as Hope Gardens. A thing of beauty is a joy forever. Many of us who grew up in Kingston, we were talking earlier about the memories and the nostalgia and what it meant, and what it meant really over the generations. And it's a joy to sit here because we are pretty much surrounded by green, and we haven't had a lot of rain, but somehow you have managed to irrigate very well. So what is it that we're doing? So Royal Botanic Gardens, we have heard scientific studies, and Jamaica was a major player in the transfer of plants across the Atlantic, and our history is replete with botanical gardens. We have several, many in disrepair, shall we say, or not where they need to be. And but what I would like us to focus on is the whole business of urbanism. And we've talked about cities and cityscapes. The reality of our existence is that more and more people are living and will continue to live in urban areas. And it has been estimated globally that by 2050, we will have over 65% of the world's population living in urban areas. Urban areas are heat islands, and cities across the world, and indeed the Caribbean, are now implementing ecosystem-based adaptation measures. We have maybe started in Jamaica to a limited extent, and listening to Jenna, and we know some of the things, but again, we are in pockets, and we have to be real. If we look around us, we see what is happening in Kingston. We see buildings going up, right? Not architecturally designed buildings necessarily, or architecturally designed space. We see buildings. We see a lot of concrete. We see a lot of transformation of surfaces. And what is unfortunate is that in many places, let's call them the builders, contractors, you move into a site and the first thing you do is mow down anything that will get in the way of a tractor. That wasn't always the case. Not to be personal, but when we started business and we were looking at environment, we would go into a site, we would flag the trees of a certain girth, and they would be labeled, and if any contractor mowed down that tree, they had to pay. We would remove vegetation that was the habitat, replant, position in a nursery that could be replanted. What has happened to that? Jenna mentioned tree preservation. We have tree preservation orders here, but like everything else, if it's not maintained, if it's not regularized, if it's not enforced, then we have a problem. But we don't want to focus on problems, we want to focus on solutions. So we want to create green spaces so that we can offset the impacts of climate change and use these urban ecosystem-based practices to meet important human needs. Because at the end of the day, it is about people and maintaining our health, which is critical. The minister mentioned it, but I would like us to focus on the relationship between green spaces and health. And I'm thinking of physical health, emotional health, and mental health. Emotional health, mental health, we like to push under a rug and pretend that it doesn't exist, or we stigmatize people. But ladies and gentlemen, we here in Jamaica have a real problem. And it's not unique to Jamaica. That problem of emotional and mental health is escalating worldwide, and it is escalating more with increasing urbanization. And we went through the pandemic, which is not unrelated, which is very much related to preservation of loss of biodiversity. And if we continue to ignore these, we are leaving ourselves exposed to some really severe challenges. So I'm saying that the ecosystem services to which we are referring, that we want, the green space that we want, the tree cover that we want, plants, because it doesn't have to be all trees, right? We want green space to help us with cleaner air, water, recreational areas, reliable sources of food, and so on. The Barcelona Institute for Global Health, I found interesting, a report that they came out with. Green space is associated with a large number of health benefits, including premature mortality. And they did a study really of European cities. And it was interesting that they were able to link those cities that had fewer green spaces with higher levels of premature mortality. It's something that we might want to research. Green spaces are also associated with longer life expectancy, fewer mental health problems, less cardiovascular disease, better cognitive functioning in children and the elderly, and healthier babies. And as we said, it helps to mitigate air pollution, social interaction, and so on. And I found interesting for the children, who are, of course, our future generation, they found that there appears to be a greater benefit for children, cognitive functions, from green spaces. So they were able to say that for one of the studies they did, children who went to a school with more green space had considerably better cognitive function than those who went with less. And another study found that early childhood exposure to green space leads to fewer mental health problems in adult life. That's something worth pursuing. Some of you may be aware of the initiative that has been implemented or continues to be implemented by the Violence Prevention Alliance, where they're trying to build gardens in schools, largely for children to sort of like meditation areas, peace areas, and some of it's working fairly well as I understand. Those are the kinds of initiatives that we want. So we have Hope Gardens as a model, which needs a lot of attention and a lot of investment and a lot of partnership, but we want also other initiatives to be linked. We want that connectivity to which Jenna referred. And as you spoke of connectivity, it reminded me, I studied in Milwaukee, in Wisconsin, and it's famous for its parks. And you could drive from one park to the other. And I'm sure it was planned that way, but I never thought of it until I heard Jenna's point about the connectivity. So it was really lovely. You could move from park to park. I'm sure they designed it that way, but for us mortals.
Thank you, Eleanor. Daniel,
Yeah.
over to you
Yeah.
for your opening.
Good afternoon again, everyone. I did say that I was loud, so it seems as if the sound technician, everyone can hear me. Right, so first of all, let me just say congratulations to the Hope Royal Botanic Gardens on their sesquicentennial anniversary. I had to make use of that word. My principal had drilled it into me when my school had celebrated 150 years. So, and I'm very happy to be a part of what is an intergenerational conversation and listening to the esteemed experts who went before me. And what I have to contribute to this is the youth perspective and also my experience having been involved in youth engagement although I'm always considered the baby of groups and at work, but I've just rounded off my first decade of my professional career, and that has exposed me to several formats as it relates to climate engagement, youth outreach, and environment education. And I've recognized that it is also a space that constantly evolves and requires dynamic approaches. And even through my research, having completed my master's, it stressed on the importance of participatory and immersive approaches to environment education. I see Mrs. Dorian Rowan Campbell nodding her head, and I remember just a few months ago having journeying out to St. Thomas to the Soils and Sustainability Workshop, and I was saying to myself how important it is to learn about the environment within the natural environment, because had it been a formal classroom setting, that would have been a different experience. And it also brings me to the point of the important catalyst urban spaces and green spaces can become when it comes on to environment education. We have the Hope Gardens, there's Emancipation Park, and several other green spaces, and that's critical for that to change the tempo as it relates to how we engage with young people and how we find ways to use green spaces and urban spaces to integrate sustainable living and lifestyle practices. So it's not so much about the awareness and the behavior change campaign that's instructing people to say, do this. No, it's about how do we design activities that make it convenient for people to do it. Mr. Price mentioned earlier, of course, a peace garden. I look around and I also see my Rotary mentor, who was the president at the time and who was charged with establishing the peace garden. And ever since that garden has been established, it has been a staple, not just for the Rotary Club of St. Andrew, that's my parent club, but the Rotaract Club, not just of St. Andrew, but there are several Rotaract clubs in Kingston. We dub them as the Rotaract Clubs of Jamaica East. And you spoke about mental health and wellness, which is also another point that I wanted to piggyback on, because in connection to the Rotary Peace Garden, it has now been a staple venue for us conducting yoga classes, exercise classes. We've had award ceremonies, and that is so integral to the kind of legacy and culture that we're trying to instill as it relates to environmental stewardship and behavior for the membership, which is transient. So as new members come and there's turnover, everybody understands the importance of using the Peace Garden, the importance of participating in activities that are, for the environment, for the benefit of the environment, so that, it emphasizes what we need as immersive approaches. I also think about how we capitalize on trends to pull in young people. Again, I see on TikTok and social media this emphasis on everybody, myself included, being houseplant parents. And I am also wondering, how is it that we make connections with the urban spaces and green infrastructure? Spaces like Hope Gardens can perhaps offer tutorials on gardening, community volunteer programs, summer programs that bring young people in to teach them how to care for plants. There are a lot of campaigns, and I commend the work of the government, other community clubs, schools and societies about pushing tree planting initiatives. But there is another factor that we need to consider, which is the maintenance. And I say that because I would have participated in a tree planting initiative at a particular school, only to have gone back to this school just a year later to see that they have done some renovations and all the seedlings that we would have planted have now been uprooted, and there were no plants to rehabilitate. So sometimes when we're stressing the active in the spirit of sustainability and legacy, it's not just about the starting point of the activity. What are the strategies in place for maintenance? You also mentioned the connectivity that needs to happen. I thought about the elegant corridor in Montego Bay and how there's also a new term about the ecological corridor. One of the advantages that we have in Kingston is the seamless connection where Emancipation Park or Hope Gardens and Devon House is located, that people have access to affordable public transportation to access green spaces. So that's something that we also need to replicate in not just corporate Jamaica. Now I have to play up my true roots as a country girl from St. Elizabeth, because although we may have green spaces in those spaces, it's not the same in terms of the use. And it brings me to another point where it's not just about focusing on the new forms of development that emphasize the building, as you mentioned. Well-designed spaces are inclusive spaces. In my podcast, my recent podcast series, as you would have mentioned earlier, we are now spotlighting people with disabilities, preferably styled as the differently abled community, and they are championing how we can integrate infrastructure and amenities and facilities that respond to their unique needs. And you mentioned that, Dr. Blackwood. So even in Hyde Park, where when I would have done my studies in London, there is a senior playground. So adults and people of certain ages, they have different exercise equipment and different park amenities to enjoy themselves. You have in parts of Asia and Europe, the ability garden and playground, that within these green spaces, people with disability who be visually impaired, there are contrasting stairs and equipment and infrastructure that they can use. People who have mobility challenges, not just ramps and public bathrooms are automatic, in my opinion. I'm not giving anybody a clap for that. No, because it's supposed to be automatic, but now we have to see how we can expand and integrate the new developments. How are people able to engage with the benches? There are even certain apparatus and equipment that people with physical challenges can be able to partake. And when we have those sort of integration, what it does is pull people towards green spaces, pull people out into the open. And also the design, what I love about Hope Gardens, you step into this environment, it suggests family orientation. There's no part of the park that feels unsafe. And that is also a critical consideration when we speak about green spaces. It's about inclusive spaces and safe spaces. Young women and children, sometimes they don't feel safe venturing out into a lot of spaces. So that's very important for us to prioritize the inclusivity element of when we're designing our new green infrastructure. Outside of parks as well, we can look at the other elements. I heard you mention about real estate, and I thought to myself as well, another trend, and it's very good that young people are being exposed to thinking about home ownership in a more serious way. There's a plethora of YouTube channels that are looking at real estate development in Jamaica, and it's not a bad thing sometimes when we have the copycat style or approach. And what I would want to see are some of the real estate developments that even focus on integrating urban forestry and green spaces in their complexes and so forth. And I think in that way, that's a new thing that they can play up, and it will be a trend that will also catch on. So I'm hoping, looking forward to that. As I mentioned, green infrastructure in places other than parks. Also pleased to say that my Rotaract Club, we have successfully applied for a grant that will be integrating vertical or urban farming. So we've identified a Kingston-based high school that has an agriculture program, and we are going to be implementing, perhaps now at the start as a demo sort of strategy, hydroponics, because we want to, as I mentioned before, that immersive approach. It's not just about saying to students, here's a new way. It's about show and tell and having them do that. So even in the context of green infrastructure and green planning, we also have to consider not just about the vagaries of climate change, but the food security challenge that we have, and how youth can play a role in creating their own short food supply chains, contributing to food and nutrition security and financial or economic resilience in their own communities and in their own school communities. And also, it's about stimulating the prospective career choices that can happen. I see a lot of schools internationally, they have faculties and areas that are specifically focused on green infrastructure, urban forestry, and sometimes even students at high schools, they don't know, they can't see beyond. And what are the potential and the opportunities that exist outside of the traditional careers, or even sometimes the trending careers. And it's just how we can use these green spaces as points of learning and points of enhancing social interaction and physical interaction. Because for me, I live by the mantra that awareness leads to understanding, which leads to appreciation, and it leads to action. Because now when you put all of that together, having inclusive spaces, having safe spaces, giving people opportunities to be engaged in a participatory and immersive kind of way, then it now means they're inclined to protect the biodiversity and to reach out, because That's always a challenge when I'm engaged in climate conversations. Young people don't find it sexy. How are they going to engage? Nobody wants to go to Zoom meetings. I'm zoomed out and zoned out. But if you're telling me that you're having, like I missed out last week on a food waste workshop that was being hosted by 2 young girls in collaboration with private sector partners, those are the activities that we need to showcase and find ways and entry points of having sustained engagement so that it becomes a part of the culture and the fabric. And now, you know, that's a big picture that we need to work towards, to have persons being active and appreciative of the spaces around us.
All right. Thank you, Dainalyn. And we are having a conversation that is born out of the need to maintain what we have. And LaShawn, Dania touched on the introduction of apparatus that we don't presently consider a part of the established green spaces. So you are representing someone who is from the superintendent of public gardens, which means that a lot of the maintenance and regulatory heavy lifting falls in your department. So please, your remarks to the public forum.
Yes. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is LaShawn Reese. I'm the Public Garden Division in the Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries and Mining. I'm currently employed as an horticulturist agronomist in that division. Basically, we have 4 critical mandates. We are responsible for conservation of species, education, research, and life, which is vitally important. These mandates are vitally important for the protection of species and for the preservation of species. We have 5 major places that we actually are in charge of. Bath Botanical Gardens in St. Thomas, Syncona Botanical Garden in St. Andrew, Cassitan Botanical Gardens in St. Andrew as well. We also have Allen Bamboo Avenue as well as Fern Gully Scenic Avenue. And we have also oversight for Hope Gardens as well. And you're talking about sustainable development as such. Green spaces are of vital importance to our country. Because, you know, anthropogenic or man's activities have immensely impacted the species diversity within our country. So it is vitally important that everybody put his or her hands, heart, and heads together to make the sustainable development and the utilization of resources be done in a manner that the future, the present as well as the future generation can benefit. So, in terms of Botanical Gardens, you know, it is the second oldest botanical gardens in the Western Hemisphere. And it was the first area in Jamaica that the breadfruit was planted. The breadfruit was taken into Jamaica by Captain Bligh. And this is critical. You see all the economic value that the breadfruit has played. Hence the need for us to conserve these species. Also, it was the first place also that the ackee was also planted. And that's, you know, it is our part of our national dish. It is a vitally important species. It's an essential species. The public garden, green spaces, without the green spaces, provide a blast of fresh air, blast of oxygen for all of us. Humans depend heavily on plants for oxygen. Without oxygen, we will cease to exist. And green spaces enable you to give you social, economic, as well as environmental benefits. So those are the 3 dimensions that you actually can get from green spaces. Social benefits can include, example, relaxation. You can go on there and relax. You can go there and have a picnic with your family. All of these are critical for your benefit. Environmental benefits, as I said before, oxygen, provision of clean water because of filtration by plant roots as well as by leaves. These are vitally important. And so we have Fern Gully Scenic Avenue is home for a wide variety of ferns, more than 50 species of ferns. Those ferns are pioneer species. These are species that were there before many other species, there before the trees. So it is quintessential that we preserve and protect these species. They provide oxygen, home for animals, which is vitally important. So hence the need for us to preserve and protect our species. We look at Castleton Botanical Garden, which is also crucial in St. Andrew, which we are trying to actually propagate and to conserve different exotic species, such as the lychee, such as the rambutan. All these species are of vital economic value to our country. We look at Cinchona Garden, where we are currently spearheading a research on the Cinchona officinalis. This plant was used heretofore for curing actually malaria. Hence the need for all of these species, hence the need for conservation of species. Cinchona has an atmosphere which is very cool. It is very cool, it is unique, and it's, as they said, like a second heaven. It's so spectacular and wonderful to be at that place. Above 5,000 meters above sea level. So we at Public Gardens, we see the need to fulfill our mandate to ensure the present and as well as the future generation can benefit, and creating as well as continue to propagate or promulgate the creation of green spaces is important. There are plans ahead, plans afoot to create more green spaces, even in Western Jamaica. And that again is important. So we want also in our educational drive, we want the smallest to the largest, or the smallest to the biggest person to actually help to actually learn the importance of plants. And by doing this, they can actually start to learn plant names. Some plants you might see or take for granted. We have to be more environmentally conscious that these plants are important for us. Some of these species were here long before we came on Earth. And it is our duty, it is our role to ensure that we continue to conserve and preserve our species. So using a forum like this is critical. It is a key step towards attaining something, towards scaling a high height like never before. And if we continue to drive this awareness through education and just believe in ourselves that we can attain anything that we put our mind together. For as the quote said, whatever the mind can conceive and believe, the mind can achieve. To aspire is to achieve. So if we put our hearts, hands, and head together and believe that we actually can conserve our biodiversity by taking care of our green spaces and by being a part of it, we can make it. And we can achieve whatever we put our hearts together.
Thank you very much, Mr. Reeves. So we can see that the NPF chose a diverse panel for a reason, where we've seen the different domains of activities, professional activities and professional work that brings us here. We're also Jamaicans, so we know that a key component of our DNA is our cultural expression. And at this point, we're going to introduce, before we take your questions, Tishana Mullings. And Tishana will, yes, no, Tishana will guide us through a program which is also celebrating its own anniversary. It's a Little Genius program, and one of her little, I can never remember what's the correct plural for genius, so I'm going to speak Jamaican now. One of the little genius, them, is also here, so he will be introduced as well. Tishana?
Good afternoon, everyone. So there is one critical thinking competition for primary level students 8 to 11 in this region, and I'm proud to announce that it was incubated where the first breadfruit tree was planted, and today I'm learning also Akia, Akia and Brescia go together really well, and then the brand Brescia, those are my cousins. It's a full connection, and then Carla, executive director, is my friend, and then Dainalyn, we were on the Chevelin Scholarship together. It's a whole connection that's taking place here. And you would have missed the 12 performers who did environmental pieces, because our theme this year, where Dainalyn was an adjudicator, what a piece of connection. Right, and the theme this year was the donut economy. Everybody say donut economy. I'm not Tishana Mullings if I don't ask the audience to say something. It's a part of my brand and the way I flow. So our theme was the donut economy, creating a space that is safe and just for all. So we have several young Jamaicans who are 8, 9, 10, and 11 who understands fully, thoroughly what the donut economy means and can really express themselves on that. So what you will see today is a sample of something great. Please make welcome the 10-year-old man who was our winner this year with his piece, Save the Environment, Malachi Aaron Wilkins.
Hello there, I am Mr. Fax Machine. Pathway to a natural environment, pathway to a natural environment. What a surprise! Hope Gardens is celebrating its 150th year. What an achievement! But still, I need to have a conversation with you. Play the beat. We are killing our earth, and that's no fun. No one believes us because we are young. Well, today I come to spill some facts. Sit tight, please don't have a heart attack. We are killing our earth. Bushfire in Jamaica is on the rise due to the actions of humans, and that's no surprise. Forest fires both here and overseas destroy all our beautiful trees. We have to save our earth. We have to save our earth. Global warming and expensive, folks. For the last time, listen. This is no joke. Our factories are working. Toxins are emitting. The ozone is crumbling. And we won't stop putting chemicals in the air. We are trying to breathe. Our future is being stolen, and we are the thieves. Sea levels are rising. Icebergs are melting. The coral reefs are dying. Tell me who is helping? Do you realize they keep the oceans alive. If we don't take care of this earth, then how will we survive? We have to save our earth. We have to save our earth. Lady, don't move yet. I'm not finished. Hold on to your skirt. Listen, me do done. Let me tell the lady, me do done. Renewable power is what we need. Unplug and take shorter showers. Shorter showers. Take your shower. You know what have? If we reduce, reuse, recycle. Reduce, reuse, recycle. You try it. No, here. Reduce, reuse, recycle. Let us make a change together. We don't want to fall. Let's create a space that is safe and just for one and all. So awareness is coming straight from this little genius named Malachi. Yes, I may be small, but I've came on a big mission. I want you, yes you, to hear my very little voice. We can save the earth together. Make we change the narrative. We are gonna save our earth. We are gonna save our earth. Come now. We are gonna save our earth. We are gonna save our earth. I don't hear you. I don't hear you. Our earth. We are gonna save our earth.
Thank you very much, Malachi. So if after the keynote presentation and these 4 excellent presentations from the panelists, there was a doubt as to why the maintenance, firstly, of the Hope Royal Botanic Gardens, but more importantly, natural spaces and the natural environment is an important mission. Malachi's presentation pulled it all together, including the age-old reference that a child shall lead the way. I don't think the panelists would disagree with me or reprimand me for saying that the way Malachi brought it to life and speaking from that generation into whose custody we will all fall, it was an eye-opener, a call to action, and sufficient information as well. So I am not surprised why this particular young man was selected as one of the little genius them. And I think it's an appropriate point to invite. Geniuses is fine. Where you say, when I grew up, sheep was singular and plural, but you had fish and fishes. Now you only have fish as singular and plural. And you had radius and radii. Conversation was not broken down to conversating. So now I'm hearing all of those as part of official language or language used by officials. So I'm not sure if because officials use it means that it's official language. So sometimes I get confused, but you know what always work? The Jamaican language. So that's why I call him one of the genius them. And today we could also say he was one of the panelists them. But if you have any questions at this point for any of our panelists, please step forward. As I had said at the start, be succinct and precise. You might think it unfair of me to now remind us of the time. It's 4:30. We started half an hour late, and our intention was to have begun and concluded within 2 hours. So if you do have any questions, you may pose them now. Yes, sir? Yeah, just come to the front. Be one of the other genius them.
Okay. Good afternoon, and enjoy the presentation. I'm very disappointed that the minister is not here because he's the person I'd really like to address on this point. gardens here, I consider the ground sacred. And nothing should change on this garden. Now, we have a way that in Jamaica, when we talk about development, it means concrete. And one of the things that disturb me is the concrete that was put in here under the guise of a Chinese garden. It is hideous. It should never have been there. It has taken away a lot of the green space, and it does not have any access to everybody. The pond is also not available unless you have to pay a price to get into the Chinese garden. This should never be. This property is here for the use of all Jamaicans. I am here very often, sometimes 3 to 4 times a week, because I don't live very far, and I use the garden to do my walk in the evenings, myself and my wife. Now, it's 200 and something acres, and I know that this garden extends all the way to Skyline Drive. And I'm going to invite you all, when you're leaving, to just take a look at the hills behind here. And you see that it is being overrun already by squatters. I have brought this up, and we just don't seem to be getting any any traction at all. Mr. Simon, I know, is very concerned. We have communicated time and time about this. What are we going to do about this? And I know politics and squatting don't mix. They're afraid of it. This is hallowed ground. That piece of land must not be allowed to fall prey to squatting. I would like your comments.
Thank you very much.
I support the point. And in terms of the squatting, I know the settlement above created a major problem with one of the storms that we had. Where, which one was it? I can't remember. You remember? Ivor. Where all of that debris came because of the disturbance of the slopes. So you're looking also at safety, and people's houses and so on were damaged. And going further along, even persons who live on the slopes are at risk. So, you know, I support the point. And perhaps the thing to do is to ensure that no more of this happens. And even the change with respect to the Chinese garden and whatever. And it should really, if you're going to get an investment within the garden, it should maintain its purpose in terms of being open and available. You go to other gardens in other countries, and you may have a Japanese garden or something where it represents the flora, but it is a part, it's integrated within the overall. So I agree with that.
It really is an addition to my neighbor. When we managed to push the houses out of Hope Gardens, if any of you were alive at the time and can remember it, we then worked on a plan. And part of the plan, because we worked with young people, we worked with the schools, and the schools had environmental groups who said, we want to be able to be the ones who would be the guides on trails on those slopes above. Well, when the discussion was focusing around the zoo, we were told, no, the roadway is where the gardens end. And we said, well, make an entrance where the teak forest is. Make a road up through there with gates. Forestry said they would work and help to make the fire burn areas, because we are very open to fires. And we were told simply, no, everything above it belongs to the zoo. I bring this up because the minister said several times, we will maintain the perimeter. And I think his perimeter is the road. And my perimeter is Skyline Drive. And so I think that all of us here who are passionate about Hope Gardens need to fight to have that perimeter extended. We need to have trails. We need to have picnic areas. We need to have places where there are no signs like under the beautiful mahogany trees at Devon House which say, no picnics, no food. Are we such a wealthy, wealthy place that people can come to Devon House and go and eat in the restaurant? Please, we have no sense of social justice. But this is something I'm asking all of you. They are talking once again about houses in the gardens. So be ready. No, but we know that. But when they divided it up, it's very clear that above there is the zoo and below is Hope Gardens. And I think that's the political approval.
Sure. Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Hi, Dainalyn. Congrats, Hope Gardens, for the 150 years in existence. I do have my fond memories, though I look young. I can remember my younger days being here. What my question is for the young people. I do have my various hand in environment, and I am a founder of the Green Care Training and Workshops, where I go around in inner city communities and talk about agriculture, climate change, all those things, because we need to involve the inner city communities. I think we do so many things and we exclude the lower socioeconomic persons, and I'm like, we are here, and anything that may happen, we feel it the worst, we feel it the most. So I decided to do that. We're in our third year, but I want to know as a young person, how do you encourage us who need the funding for these awesome programs and projects? Where do we go? When you send out the letters to the organizations, they patronize you and they ignore you, and then you see them spending so much on so many other things, and I'm like, I want 100,000, you know, that's all I want, 100,000. I look at 100,000. All right, 50, give me 50, me work with the 50, but nobody looks at you. So how do you encourage us young people with these amazing projects, programs, who want to do our little end in our little corner?
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I want to first start by thanking the panelists for the thought-provoking conversations. And my fellow Jamaican predisposed me with speaking about the concrete, because I listened to the minister speaking and I was following him and piecing the pockets of tree planting and different initiatives that's been laid out. And then I thought to myself, and the finale is concrete Devon House. And we come to the Chinese garden, you know, the beauty is in the eyes of the beholder. So looking at it and seeing it is a different thing. I am disappointed that you have to pay to go in there. But the point of what I'm saying is, we had this wonderful conversation laid out for us about the purpose of a landscape architect, and thank you for that, because I was misguided in some sense of understanding your role and even thinking if I wanted my yard to look nice, I should call a landscape architect, right? And so to know that there is greater purpose, and just to see how we can really and truly, out of this conversation and the knowledge in the room today, take it further to action, especially when I even recall, as a child, you could enter this premises, this sacred ground from several gateways, wherever you chose to drive, but today you have to come through one. And then I ask why, and how does that link me to the other areas and the other accesses that you spoke about, and how does that help me to have that sense of mental wellness from the green space that's afforded to me that you spoke about. And when we speak to our youngsters and we're looking at planting trees and how we take care of them. It's beyond that. I'm a Rotarian, a part of the same movement that Rotaract fits into, and we do a lot of tree planting, but we have to take it a step further and to see how it can fit into a national development plan. My next concern is we have these gardens that are under your purview and protected, and there are these plants that we don't know about, and there are some that we know about, our ferns in Fern Gully. And I would want to know, are we thinking about linking that into a bigger plan? Can we stop driving through Fern Gully? Where's the advocacy? What do we do? We found love in this room, but what do we do with it? And I would really love for us to take this further. I'm happy for this conversation, and I'm looking forward to us doing more with it.
All right, so if we could get some responses to that round of questions, and then I noticed that there are at least 3 other hands up, so we'll come to them after. Yes, go ahead, Dr. Jenna.
All right, am I up? So there were lots of different points. The point of the squatting, I know that, well, I did mention about our policies and about our green plan and about Vision 2030 being this utopia that we have. It is a vision. The squatting is not just here at Hope Gardens, but it is along our riverbanks. If you go up to Hope, along Hope River, it is along all of the gullies that we have in Kingston. I mean, I've seen I would think I'm young, but I've seen I've seen where I used to drive along and you would have clear gullyways, and now you don't. And there are policies that we need to put in place. It's not just that we should because we want to leave these areas where people can't go. We understand, but there are other issues that we need to think of. When people are in places where they should not be, it is exposing them and us to risk. They're in a landslide zone. I've seen them, they're using tires and all kinds of things to create, because they know that it is an unsafe area. But it is up to our policymakers. I won't get into that, but who know they are there and who need to create the policies. And I think back to your point about what do we do next, it is for all of us to be the voices. And I think in recent years, people have begun to say things, and that has, I think, put some pressure on the policymakers to make some changes. They are not going to necessarily, make it known that they're actually responding, but you will see some changes happen. So like the ministers here today, I mean, I have written in the newspaper, I think Eleanor has written in the newspaper, we've written on different issues. And you see when they now announce certain things, they know that they have to do some research and they have to put some things in place. So if we keep doing that, and there is strength in numbers, so when it is just 1 and 2 people doing it, then you find that it is difficult because it is just 1 and 2. But if we're all saying the same thing, then the government should respond. And I'm saying government broadly, because it doesn't matter who is there. It is that they are the policymakers, and we are trying to change policy because it affects us.
And the question as it relates to the youth component, but you said something that resonated about how does it fit into the National Development Plan. Personally, I don't like to overcomplicate activities. If it is that we understand what Vision 2030 is about the healthy and natural environment and the sustainable management and use of resources, or anything per se that contributes to that advancement, you're fitting yourself into the National Development Plan. So if you're mobilizing as a community club, you're mobilizing as a benevolent society or any organization that's contributing somewhat to anything sustainable related, then to me, that's how you fit into that. The valid point I take, which I also made about the tree planting versus the management and the sustainability of it. From a communication perspective, I also believe in starting with the target audience most ready for action. So a lot of times with these tree planting initiatives, the reality is that sometimes you run up and down and try to find organizations or schools that want to receive trees. But one of the best things that you can do, especially when it comes to community activation, is when residents and the community say, we want this for our space. So even currently, I'm collaborating with my Rotary Club of St. Andrew, where they've identified a particular community to implement a garbage disposal campaign. And believe me, as an advocate, this is the easiest part of the advocacy, sitting here in a panel discussion to a receptive audience that's already preaching to the choir. Listen, when I've done that community walkthrough in that inner city space, and I told them my purpose of why I'm here, Miss, we don't want that. And when you see the garbage strewn all about, Miss, see if I can get JPS to cut down the tree here. So the work is really about the behavior change and the culture that you have to counter and the massaging of that process before we can even get to, because citizens aren't robots. There are certain things that the resistance that's there because of some of the socioeconomic factors and the political factors that are entrenched that we have to undo and unravel before we can even get to those places. So it's the same way where when you get a pool of bright students and they're already going to ace a class, but then when a teacher has to deal with other students to build up, those are the people that we really need to target, and it's not an overnight thing. So it's just for us to recognize that you're doing what you can in your capacity, and cumulatively that will have some sort of difference and impact. Kimara, as it relates to where we get funding and how and all of that, I just think it's about casting the net as wide as possible. Sometimes the reality is that people give money to people, but also you are also a part of networks that can mobilize and write proposals and funding. And I know that there's a trend, especially for young people who are starting to be more attuned to climate networks, not just locally, but regionally and internationally, that are dedicated to providing funding for persons who are willing to carry out certain work, willing to introduce. So we're lucky to receive funding from global grants. So the next dispensation is something that we can promote and pass on. So there are organizations that are willing to provide green investment and green funding, to implement climate action or community action projects for persons to further the work that they want to do. So sometimes it's not just about looking at the bespoke organizations, but even you may have a corporate person that wants to partner with you. So for me, it's about casting the net. There is no one organization best placed. I think it's just doing our research and always looking how we can network, how we can collaborate, and maybe leverage the power of connectivity. So maybe you don't know someone in a particular space, but I do or somebody else does, and the referrals and building that sort of database and portfolio will help us to achieve or inch closer to our goal.
Okay, I think the answers are well done. We can take some other questions or comments.
Yes, good afternoon. Thank you for the thought-provoking panel discussion. I wanted to address something that comes up all the time when it comes to collective community responsibility of green spaces and other things. It was brought up twice about the Chinese gardens and cost and access. So Chinese gardens aside, we are accustomed to Hope Gardens being a free green space. I've had the privilege to travel, and one of the places I go to wherever I travel is the Botanical Gardens. And it's only a few places where it's free, or totally free, because you have to maintain the collection, you have to maintain the gardens, you have to pay staff. If it's a proper botanical gardens, there's research components, there's conservation components, there are all these things that need funding. All the funding does not come from pay to access. It comes from membership and donations. So you'll go to a botanical gardens, there's an entrance fee. Not saying that that has to be the case here. They implemented parking. Initially, people were very upset about that. $200 here and there, it helps to fund the park. We cannot always just depend on the government to find the money, which is our tax-paying dollars, to take care of things. Other places you go, the first thing or the second thing on entrance is, how do I donate? Here's a drop box. Sign up, become an annual member, become a family member, all of these things. You have various projects that are constantly ongoing in which you donate. If there's a theme section, you can have a general access area where most people come and it's free. But then if you have the orchid collection, you have to pay a fee to go into the orchid collection, because the fees for that orchid collection go to the maintenance of that orchid collection. If it's a case where the orchid collection is a part of a conservation effort to propagate and rehabilitate and reintroduce rare endemic orchids, you need funding for that. So we need to think about how we collectively contribute and maintain certain areas, and not just always say, boy, I have to pay for that, no, it's access. There's a give and take. In terms of the Chinese garden, I was personally upset that the Chinese garden took away the main water feature of the garden. So I'm hoping that there will be earmarked somewhere else that has a new water feature. And again, the Chinese gardens can then take on more of the Chinese-themed curation of plants. So you have your Chinese garden. Yes, it's a bit larger than I think it should be. But then we actually have more themed sections that lend to botanical education and research. But it's a little unfair, and I find it's just because it's what we used to, that people tend to go, oh, this place used to be free, it should be free, and then there's no contribution from the collective that's utilizing it.
All right, as I make my way over to the next person, the managers have actually preempted some of your suggestions, and will be, during this week, formally announcing the membership drive, where you get a membership card which guarantees you some discounts for parking. It was launched 2 days ago, and it will be, in terms of mass media attention, will be given to that. There are some additional benefits that you get with membership cards, which will be added on, or I think the new phrase is onboarded as the program evolves. So you can look out for more of that. And there are some sheets which we will distribute, which gives you the information, and so that you are able to sign up today. There you go, sir.
Thank you very much, Raymond. Thank you very much to the panelists and the minister who was here. I wish another minister was also here. The minister probably responsible for the park. I suspect that this park falls under the Minister of Agriculture. Mr. Green, it would have been nice to see him, because maybe some of our concerns would have been heard directly. Mr. Moderator, I heard your guideline at the start, or near to the start, where you said it's better to ask succinct questions. And so I'm going to ask a succinct question, and then I'm going to go out into my gungo. So my question to each of the four of you, and I'd really like to hear your individual views, is, are you happy with the way the park is being run? And even if you're happy, or if you're not, how could they improve on it? And the reason why I'm asking is because, as a resident of Hope Pastures, generally speaking, we're not happy. We are mostly unhappy. And we're unhappy for a number of reasons. One of the reasons that we're unhappy is because, Eleanor, we don't get that sweet dreams and, what is it that you spoke about? Sweet dreams and quiet sleeping. Is it John Keynes, or yes? No, we don't get that. And a part of the reason why we don't get that, Dr. Blackwood, I suspect, is because of borrowing one of the 7 C's that you mentioned. You talk about choices and creativity. You spoke about social justice and collaboration. It's because some of the choices that the park is making is just not sustainable or compatible with the neighborhood, or the 2 neighborhoods that adjoins it. We are the subject, or is it the object, of the 30-odd events that are held in here monthly. Some of them by very big corporate citizens that have choices. some of them by DJs who, and probably one of the C's should be Cash, said that Hope Gardens is one of the cheapest venues to rent for an entertainment event. It is cheaper to book a venue, from what I understand, in Hope Gardens than it is at Sabino or I think it's Independence Square Park. How could that be so? This is the premier park, gardens in the city. So many options. How can it be? No, I'm not suggesting to the gardens that they should raise the fees for the DJs. What I'm suggesting is that they make better choices, or rather that the owner of the park make better choices. And so I don't want to go too far away from my question because I'd like to hear your answer, but we are upset. We're upset with the way the gardens are being used. We all live nearby because we love it. We love the freshness of the gardens, and we don't like the way it's being run. We don't like to see the lawns degrade into chicken foot grass. You know, none of the grass in the gardens quite looks like this. You know, a lot of the grass is degrading the hedges. We don't like to see the large guango tree being cut down, and you kind of get vacuous reasons as to why it was cut down that, you know, kind of sound like you're making an excuse for clearing the area that you use for the party stands or for the DJs most often. We don't like that. We want to see our trees being preserved in our conservation areas. We don't want to see our large trees being cut down in our botanical gardens. We don't want to be subjected to loud noise, and particularly by the corporate citizens that have better choices. You know, I must praise Scotiabank for making a good choice as to where they held their Christmas venue, where they held their Christmas party, in comparison to others that chose to abuse us. So I would like to hear each of your responses. We're not happy with the way the park is degrading. We're not happy with the way it's being used or the choices that are being made. And I'd love to hear the views of the four experts. Moderator.
Thank you, sir. We'll go right to left this time. Go ahead, Eleanor.
You've been very expressive, and I've heard I don't live in Hope Pastures. My family used to live in Hope Pastures. They were not, because I guess the proximity to the park was not. But your points are very well taken. But what I would say is the park, the gardens, we need a financial model. And I heard some reference to it. And I would like to see that pursued, because the fact is you cannot maintain the gardens without proper financing. That's key. I hear about the noise, and it's not appropriate because you also have animals and so on. So the residents of Hope Pastures are the ones who can best speak to that. But I think as a principle, you don't want to have that. But when you're thrust as a manager to maintain something and you're looking for ways to finance it, I would like to suggest that those persons here, including you, Christopher, offer yourself to the park management, to the garden management, and to this financial model that is being suggested, so that it's not just 2 or 3 people, but people who understand not only what it takes to maintain, because you and I know that, we all know that, and you have to find a way. And unfortunately, it's not enough for us to say we don't like it. Thou shalt stop doing it. Give me help. And I think we should ask for help and have the help come from where it can come. That would be
I would like to add to that, and I would just like to say that I know this is not unique to Hope Gardens. This is a problem that any public space has. I am aware, for example, at Hollywell, they are also looking at a redevelopment plan because they are also under pressure of how to, you have to pay staff, they have to pay rangers, they need to control the area and all of that, and they just don't have the funds because they do not.
They have to also prevent illegal logging.
They have to do, exactly. There's a lot that they have to do, and they don't have the resources to do it. This gentleman here, he said, when he goes to other places, there you do have to pay to enter, and then what they usually do is they rent or they have other things that you earn from, or research grants, etc. One of the things that I just wanted to mention is I do know that some years ago there was a redevelopment plan that was done for Hope Gardens and the zoo. I'm not sure if it included the economic part of it, but I do know that there was a plan for the entire gardens, for the entrance, for different activities, for different, themed gardens, etc. I'm not sure if that plan is being followed. I don't know if they have any more help. So maybe we need to go back to the drawing board and go back to that plan and see what needs to be revised and how we can update it. I do know, a lot of work was put into that. They got an expert from somewhere to come, a lady who came from England, and she did a plan and all of that. So I don't know what happened to it. And then, so it means that we do have that was developed, so we can go back to that. As Eleanor said, and all of us, they mentioned the membership drive and the membership program and so on. So there are other ways that we need to explore to get the funding that is required, because the truth is the Ministry of Agriculture would not be able to maintain it to the standard that we would want it to be and to what we remember. When we used to come and they would have the bandstand and the band playing and all of that. So we really have to look at that.
Tina, are you happy with how the...
I'm happy. Based on some of the points that were raised, these are critical challenges, and I was saying a little bit in passing to Ms. Jones that perhaps we need to change even just the structure of these discussions, because the people who need to hear it are in position to make the change. So perhaps then it's almost a little futile to be sharing perspectives and concerns in a setting where, so you're right, we're preaching to the choir. So sometimes we spoke about social justice and inclusivity and part of sustainable development and partnership for the goals, Goal 17. It means then that when we have collective and collaborative conversations and decisions, we need the spectrum of leadership to be a part of these things. Or even if they're not present in the space, we need to know, be convinced or feel more confident that there is some avenue to which our concerns are valid, not just in receipt, but there's something where they'll be filtered and to be taken into consideration. As it relates to, I don't really want to venture too much into my opinion about the parties and all of those, not saying that, it should be held, but it links back to how the sustenance of the gardens. So I would really say then the introduction of the membership drive is something that we could possibly ensure that we support, so that in the event that there is substantive contribution from that strategy and approach, then it can even be where there's a staggered staggered allowance of the events that happen. So say, for instance, in a span of a year, there are 12 large-scale events. Then it means over time there's 6, there's 4. And then there are other resources that are diverted to the maintenance and the preservation, because a critical thing I also thought about, how is it that we're able to achieve 150? The reality is that prior to this, there were less things happening. So when you allow nature to flourish in a way, in an undisturbed sort of way, there's a reason we're able to, so preservation sometimes means leaving things alone. So maybe we need to even consider, those things, how we're doing development. Some sometimes you watch Netflix in constructive ways. I think I had a conversation with it some time ago. What do people watch on Netflix? And I remember there's a gardening reality show, and it's even showcasing how you're able to develop and curate new without even dropping concrete and changing the structure. But how is it that you're able to curate the natural spaces? So maybe we need to look at that. I hear the concerns about the Chinese garden and you know, all the other gardens. So sometimes it's not just about the establishing symbolic gardens only, but what about those natural curated spaces that we can, you know, establish that really emphasize the element of sustainability and true preservation of the physical environment?
Right. LaShawn?
Yes, my perspective. I strongly believe that what you need first and foremost is what is called a paradigm shift, you know? A shift in how people perceive gardening, or gardens in general. Maybe persons do not see it as of vital importance. So we can use education as one of the tools, one of the chief tools to do that. You see how social media has become so large, so humongous now. We can use that as one of the tools to show how gardening is important to our country in general, and how it and maintain it in a way can add value to it, both present as well as future generation. So we have to start at the grassroots as well. So education, I see that as a tool. And when you're able to change the perception also of the persons who are involved in the working, the workers also, that can also help to shift and help them to, even as an impetus, as a motivational tool to help drive them to do better and perform them tasks well. So as I believe a paradigm shift is one of the chief things we can actually look at.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. I think that based on the time that we had intended on, that we should wrap it up now, and I'll invite Mrs. Sophia Boyd, the HR and Administration Manager here, to do the vote of thanks, which may not necessarily address some of the which will not address the matters raised, because it is in fact the vote of thanks. Thank you, Sophia.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. So we've had a robust discussion, and, you know, everybody has put their thoughts out, and it is important because dialogue is important. Hope Royal Botanic Garden, as it says in the name, is a beautiful space for everybody, and it is how we as the citizens of Jamaica preserve it so everybody can enjoy it. So on that note, I want to say thank you to the Minister who was here but left, Honourable Matthew Samuda, Mr. Raymond Price, our moderator, thank you so much, to Mr. Thomas and our board of directors who are here today supporting us as we push this initiative of saving green space, to Mrs. Eleanor Jones, OD, Dr. Jenna Blackwood, LaShawn Reeves, Mr. Reeves, thank you so much for dropping in at last minute. Dainalyn, Greta has nothing on you, all right? Just so you know, you are Jamaican Greta, right? Mr. Malachi Aaron, where's young Malachi? Has he gone? But yes, our young Malachi. So we know our environment is in safe hands. I'd like to thank our executive director. Sometimes people don't understand how hard it is to wear the cap. And particularly in this instance where you heard the jostings and everything about, you know, how the park is managed, you know, what we do and all of that. Heavy is the head that wears the crown. It is that simple. So to Mrs. Myrie, I want to say thank you for the push, for the drive and the vision. To our team, to the Nature Preservation Foundation team, I am not gonna not name them. We've got Mr. Simon, our commercial manager, We've got Mr. Conroy Graham, who is our maintenance and superintendent. We've got Mr. Jeffrey McKenzie, who is our nursery. Our nursery sustains part of our income. So we sell plants, we have the plant drive, come out, buy the plants, you know, spruce up your garden. We've got our key staff members. We've got Bev here, we've got Mr. McLean, we've got Mr. Smith here, we've got Kerry, our PR and social media young lady who has been pushing the drive for Hope Gardens. You know, we're using technology. One of the fundamental things for me today coming here, we didn't print the programs because we've got the QR code, and we were saying to people, scan so you can get the information, you know, and it takes, I'm passionate about Hope Gardens, I really am. I have a photo of when I came here as a young girl, no more than I think about 13, 14, and I discovered where I took the photo, and I'm going back to take the new photo now, and we're pushing that out as well. We've got our social media pages. Put your photos of then and now on there. So I really want to say, though, thank you, everybody, for coming out, for supporting this forum, for putting your views across. It is important, and it is in an important discussion that we need to have of how we sustain Hope Royal Botanic Gardens for the next 150 years. So thank you to everybody, and we've got some plants here that, you know, sharing the green space that you can have. The team will come and direct you in terms of what you can take. So again, everybody, thank you so much for coming out, for participating, for voicing what we need to do about protecting our urban green space, Hope Royal Botanic Gardens. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Sophia. And the closing remarks are not intended to repeat the vote of thanks. So I'll add one area of thanks, which is, again, to the audience, to the members of the media. We are also streaming live on a couple of social media platforms. I wanted to meet Uncle Chris. I recently became familiar with the Instagram page for the Hope Royal Botanic Gardens, and Uncle Chris has a feature where he goes to trees. Like, at the first time I saw inside a cannonball from the cannonball tree was on the Hope Botanical Gardens Instagram, and I now know, by the way, it is one of my very favorite flower is on the cannonball tree. It's very fragrant. It's wonderful indeed, but I never saw the ball chopped, so I now know that within 3 minutes the contents turn blue. And there are also a number of other key activities that Uncle Chris takes us through. So that's, I'd like to thank your social media manager for that, because, again, make it immersive. These are the things that draw us into the facility. Interestingly, based on my age, I was a fan of Diana, the Princess of Wales. So I became familiar with her home estate, Althorpe Estate, and her younger brother, Charles, not to be confused with Elizabeth's son, does this thing also on Instagram. That family has resided there for 500 years, and they have documents of the various persons who came through and planted different trees. They could tell you that the sheep in a particular area, the deer in another area, are direct descendants of the sheep and the deer that their ancestors found. For us as Jamaicans living in a former colony, not very many of us would have that kind of 500 years of family heritage. Hope Botanic Gardens provides an opportunity for a connection. So when Sophia spoke about finding the location where the birthday pictures were taken when you were 6 years old and uploading those on social media or sending them in with a picture taken there now, are some of the activities that bring generations back. I have pictures at Hope Gardens which include relatives who are no longer with us. So there's that automatic nostalgia. So the final point is, how do we ensure that the facility lives for another 150 years, that the neighbors in Hope Pastors and over at UTech, for the residents in the trees, confession is good for the soul. On January 1, I attended a breakfast party here. It should have been called anything else but breakfast. One of the things that I did notice was the terror that the animals expressed. When certain songs came on, you saw the birds fleeing from one section to the next, confused as to where to go. You could hear the animals in torment from the zoo. So, Mr. Burgess, I apologize for my ticket that made it profitable on January 1, and activism requires commitment and accountability. I will not attend another of those events here. That's my personal commitment, and I think without calling the sponsors, that's not necessary, but if more of us take those very active, conscious, and forward decisions, then the change will be caused, even if it was not intended by the persons who created the problem. It's interesting, I didn't think about how the residents at Hope Pastors would have felt, but as an environmental scientist, I did see I saw it. They were frantically moving literally from pillar to post. I heard that, and that's when I knew something was wrong, because I had been here on a number of occasions. I've been to the Jamaica Zoo. I know what an animal in distress sounds like. I could tell that that lion was in distress, because on days when you don't have that noise, you don't hear that kind of roaring. Similarly, when you go to Jamaica Zoo, you don't hear that kind of roaring. You see the macaw are not even caged at Jamaica Zoo. So if it's one thing that is different from that facility and this, is the absence of that kind of proximal or temporal activity that really would cause the animals to feel some amount of terror. For my role here as moderator, doing the preparation, the nerd in me, I read up on the Public Parks Act, some of what governs the work that you do, Mr. Reeves, and I think I have become a little bit more invested in the Hope Royal Botanic Gardens than just to have been the moderator today. So thank you, Sophia, and the rest of your team for the opportunity, and to the panelists, some of who I knew before and all that I'm now happy to have met. And ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon.